the debanking stuff is a sign that there's going to be some kind of serious financial crash, and they're trying to do everything to push everyone towards digital currencies, and they want a central bank digital currency. And I was actually listening to some guy talk about there's this Apple just announced this bank account with 4% interest, and I'm hearing everybody be like, I have to set one of those things up. 4% interest. That's huge. I mean, inflation's way worse than that if you're tracking the real numbers, but 4% is big for a savings account. And so now I'm hearing that this is causing an upset in the financial industry to a certain degree, at least. I'm not a financial guy. I don't know for sure, but that why get a CD at 3.8 or 4% if a savings account with Apple is better and you don't got to wait for it to mature or whatever. And so we're seeing stuff like that. And I don't know what that really means. All I know is I see people saying they're concerned about it. We're seeing banks collapse. We're seeing debanking. And I'm wondering if the big move is going to be get everybody onto digital currencies. Big collapse happens. Central bank digital currency gets launched.
I can't say whether or not that's the actual plan, but I know that nowadays there are a lot more options for people when it comes to banking. Financial technologies have really taken off. Things like Bitcoin showed that digital types of currencies can actually work. And so obviously you see banks that exist coming up, and companies now, obviously with Apple doing it with offering bank accounts or whatever, you're going to see more innovations in the financial technology sector unless the government completely shuts it down. So I don't know that they're going to, but I would expect without a central bank digital currency, I would expect more options and more possibilities for people to come from the private sector, because that's what happens.
But what does that mean as you stretch money across those different areas? If you have so many different options, then how does anything stay stable? Because if you take money out of banks, then banks are not stable. So you have to look at this and say, well, somebody has to kind of say, well, there has to be some control so that everything's not crashing.
You're talking to a libertarian here kind of dude. So I'm like, no, just straight up no. Like I think that there are tons of options for ways to save your value, things that you have, whether it be money or whether it be Bitcoin, different cryptocurrencies. There's a ton of different, currencies in the world that people can say, I think these are better than dollars for whatever crazy reason they come up with. You can buy gold, you can buy silver. There's already so many different ways to store currency and save value. Just a few more banks or more options that are now new technologies. I don't think that's any kind of significant problem. I don't think it's a problem at all. I think that's something that we can handle. I mean, most people that have a significant amount of wealth, it's usually in stocks. Or frequently in stocks and stuff like that in owning companies. So I don't know that it needs to be controlled by the Federal Reserve. I think that the markets will control that kind of stuff. So that's just my take.
Back to Twitter for a second. Do you think we're going to see a lot of people stop paying for Twitter to at least give it some time to see how it plays out? Or do they want that blue check really bad?
No, I think that I don't know. It'll be interesting because for some people, I think it's their business and they feel like that's a service they subscribe to. And so maybe they'll watch and see. And then I think that once they see the first signs of what you're concerned about, that's when you'll see people just immediately drop. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think maybe that's the appropriate response. Instead of just canceling everything outright, basically just saying to Elon, my view is this is thin ice, and if we see one bad move, like we're skittish, we are running. But for the time being, I really want to believe. I really want Elon to succeed in this endeavor. And if the issue is he's looking at the bottom line like we need advertisers, and this woman worked in the Trump administration, I'm like, okay,
She was in the Trump administration?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, Trump picked.
Well, that's what people are saying, right? I'm pretty right. Exactly. That's why I'm like, I don't know.
I think that you have to think of it from
She's a known Trump supporter, according to Vox.
So you would think that doing this, you would be very careful not to immediately make changes and make a lot of people mad, because you saw what just happened with Bud Light. I mean, they literally are giving a $15 rebate right now with every case you buy. Are
they really?
Yeah. It's a disaster for them. But if that's the reaction, why would they take the chance of everybody dropping their subscription? Which I mean, obviously this happened with big corporations just recently, so it's quite possible. But like you said, I think that you wait and you see. If this is what happens, then conservatives are not going to hesitate. They've made that clear now. We're just done with this woke stuff. If you're going to do it, we're out.
My favorite thing about Twitter since Elon took over is that he has brought back freedom of speech to an extent, which I think a lot of people value, and that's not necessarily a conservative value. It's pretty crazy that people think that is now. And Billboard Chris's remarks, like talking about what she said, freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. I wonder what is deemed hateful? Like, who's defining that?
The big play for the left is to argue that free speech is conservative so that they can make anything they don't like right wing, and then anything so right means bad, left means good.
Yep.
So from now on, I'm just going to call them right wing. It's like and I'm going to say it's always been the right that was anti-free speech.
Free speech is like the ultimate rebel move.
Yeah, so they're all far right.
Well, if you're not on the left, you're far right extremist. Even if you're on the left and you say one thing out of line, you're a far right extremist now.
It doesn't take very much to step out of line on the left.
Oh yeah, you just got to call them far right. Although left and right are relatively meaningless these days. It just means like which tribe are you in? But that's what they try to do. And then how do you fight back against that? When you say I'm for free speech, well then you're conservative. The argument they're making is free speech is a traditional position and banning hate speech is the progressive position.
Right.
Yep.
So you are old and archaic if you support the old way of doing things.
But it's also helpful to not teach history. So we just saw that the proficiency in history is at the lowest levels in the United States ever. So if you don't know what happens when you ban speech, if you don't know that people were, killed or kept in prison because they went against the king, then you don't know why the founding fathers were so adamant that we had to be able to say whatever we want, even if they don't like it, even if it's burning the American flag, even if it's something that seems so awful. They want you to be able to say it because once you start to, it's a slippery slope. Once you start to take it away, then everybody, it'll hurt them too. That's the funny thing. It will hurt them too.
I feel like conservatives have become liberal in the literal sense of things. Like liberals are far left extremists. Well, not really. Most of them are just ignorant. But then there's a lot of people who are quote unquote liberal who are actually far left. And then conservatives are adopting liberal positions. So conservatives saying something like, well, if it's your flag, you can burn it. Whereas conservatives used to say you shouldn't be allowed to burn the flag. Trump and many of the Trump supporters still said you should not be allowed to desecrate the flag. But a lot of conservatives are adopting more libertarian positions or classically liberal positions. And I think that's one of the intentions of the left is to force conservatives leftward, right? So they make the wheel rotate. The far left becomes moderate and conservatives become fringe. Then people who are center right are now the far right, and they keep turning the wheel until the left is considered moderate.
Well, I would argue even school choice is liberal. You're saying people should have the ability to choose, that we should be able to let parents make that decision on their own. And they're saying, no, it has to be our way. You have to have kids in school, in the schools we choose. Even if the school is totally failing the child, they must stay there. We don't care what you want for your kid, and we don't care if you want to have a future or an education or opportunity. You must do what we say. That is not a liberal attitude. Is that you have to conform?
No, I mean it's the idea that liberalism or the ideals of liberalism have fallen so out of favor with specifically young people. But I think there's too many of the thought leaders that have been writing books and papers and stuff for the past 30 years and influencing the teachers and influencing the schools of education. That's why you have kids that don't understand, that don't understand anything about our system. People don't understand the way that the why, things like freedom of speech and stuff are important. So I don't.
They're cutting our this country's youth from the history.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, they don't know history. And then you see there was this teacher who said something about wokeness in the schools. So the students went out and protested the teacher with communist signs.
Yeah.
And this is how it starts. People need to pay attention to this because those kids in 10, 20 years are going to be in politics.
There is a Maoist cultural revolution going on in America right now.
But people think because it doesn't happen overnight, it doesn't happen. But it's never overnight.
So I think something that we recently spoke to someone who was she moved from China when she was in her 20s and she'd gone through the revolution. And she said they started with the kids. What they did was they went to the kids and they got them to believe, and then the kids would turn in the parents for wrong think. And you can see that already. You see families breaking up over cultural issues, over political issues in the United States. And you could see that next step of children willing to go to the government and say, my parents are thinking the wrong thing. You need to go after them.
You can present evidence and people will still reject that. I've been doing this, like been saying, look, this stuff and blah, 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 and talking about that stuff with my friends that are historically liberals, right? Democrats. Like I come from the music entertainment world. And so there's tons of producers and record executives and people in bands and stuff that I'm familiar with. And most of them are basically the default Democrat, right? And they aren't aware that this is going on. And then you can show them and present evidence and see, look, these are the parallels to what went on in China when the Cultural Revolution was getting started. And here, et cetera, you can see this. And they just refuse to believe it because it doesn't have that like immediate happening right in front of me right now that they expect they expect to see with a revolution. They don't realize that it's a slow rolling kind of thing, and trying to convince them is incredibly hard. It took the Bill Maher, and I think it wasn't the Elon Musk thing. It was Bill Maher talking about his experience with, or what he saw the parallels between Maoism and the woke on college campuses now. When that came out, then a buddy of mine was like, yeah, okay, I can kind of see that. But it takes so much. It takes someone like Bill Maher, who's basically an S-lib and saying that kind of stuff.
Limousine liberals.
Yeah, it takes him to kind of be like, no, this is actually happening. And I see the parallels too. Thankfully, he said it, because that is actually going to wake up your typical liberals, your default Democrats, because that's someone they trust telling them that, as opposed to someone they don't trust telling them that. But I don't know that it has translated to something where most people feel that way.
I think one of the big ones that wakes a lot of people up is when they get called out for saying a woman is a female, or like we shouldn't have males in female sports. There's some really obvious ones that you can't ignore, are obviously insane. And like for me, having it affect my life and seeing it impact other people's lives, I know a lot of women who were very much so on the left and then saw this happen and were like, nope, not anymore.
There's a line. I mean, I really do feel like the left pushes further and further until finally the bubble pops.
Mm-hmm. But for the most part, they keep it to a certain point where it stays loving. And that's the thing. People believe it's loving. This is a kind way to do things. Look, everybody benefits from this. Everybody benefits if you don't let people say hateful things. That's what they believe, And
then they say it's hateful to say something like, the scientific research coming out of Europe suggests that we should not be giving children sex change surgery. And they say that's hate speech. And it's like, it's what they're doing in Europe. I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
I mean, it was the same thing with kids learning with masks on. Europe much earlier came out and said, we have to make sure that kids are learning to speak, that speech is very clear, that we can, and the scientific studies came out, but then, it was like, we weren't allowed to say that. I mean, there are all these things that as studies come out from other countries, we're slower to adopt that thinking. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, but I think your average person is like, oh, no hate speech, good, we shouldn't be throwing slurs around. But it's playing out to a much more extreme way.
This is what they do. They will say something like, it's the Mott and Bailey. We're just saying that people shouldn't be using slurs. And then everyone goes, well, we agree with that. Then you come out and you say something like, I have concerns about whether or not we should be sterilizing children. Hate speech, that's what we ban.
Right.
And so these default libs who don't pay attention and don't know what's going on have no idea what they're actually getting behind is like overt communism. Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.